Hi everybody, welcome to Playing the Past Junior Badge with Girl Scouts of Eastern Washington and Northern Idaho. This video is set up to introduce you to 3 different eras. You get to kind of choose which one you'd like, or you can go out and research your own. So let's go ahead and get started.
Hi, my name is Tora. I am from the Viking Era, about 793 to 1066 AD, though I'm not sure when my birthday was as our records were limited. My people were in Scandinavia, and we were actually considered Norse. Viking itself was the profession of pillaging, going out, raids, etc., and fighting. There is some speculation that we would have actually gone with our men, though nobody really knows. We might have, we might not have. It was probably likely that we went on voyages, but not out so much to fight. That being said, there were remains found in Burka that show that it is possible that some of us fought as well. So we actually had more rights than most of the rest of the world at the time. We were allowed to marry, divorce. We did still raise our children. We were also allowed to create pieces of art and sell them, which were normally ceramics, some metalwork. The most metalwork was done by men, etc. If we divorced, which was actually really easy to do, we would have one witness come in. We would just be able to say, I divorced this person. If it was because the male had cheated on his wife or some such, then we actually received our dowry back as well as extra money and resources from our ex-husband at that time. If our husbands died, we were also received the land and dowries and were able to stay on our own and have those to support us. We did raise our children primarily, but sometimes the men would help us around with chores and around the house. But for the most part, we took care of our house, we took care of our finances, we took care of the sewing and the farm work and anything else that needed to be done. A lot of different music we actually enjoyed. People would play flutes or lutes or even horns. A horn would be a cow horn like I have shown here, that you would blow into and you'd be able to play the music with the different holes. A lyre was very similar to a harp, and it was played very similarly. I also have one of those shown for you. So the only way that we actually, or that people these days actually know how music sounded was by descriptions. However, the descriptions that were displayed were often by those who had a lot of differences and saw the Vikings and Norse as heathens, and so the music is described as such. In that same vein, the music is thought to be more like warlike, drum-like, very upbeat and active.
Hello everyone, I'm Rosamund and I am here to welcome you to the Renaissance. Welcome. As far as we know, it's the best time to be alive. Some time ago, the printing press was invented, so we no longer have to rely on people to copy out books by hand. So now everybody can buy books for a lot cheaper. And the Renaissance started in Italy and spread north through Europe all the way to England, where I'm from. And right now it's about 1550. So, welcome. And let me tell you a little bit about what life is like for women here. So, for the most part, women are expected to be for the most part, women become wives or nuns, depending on how wealthy they were to start out with. So, as a peasant woman, I have gotten married to a lovely carpenter, and we have a halfway decent life. So that's exciting. Richer women are going to be able to be more educated, but I was able to learn how to read and write and count by my parents. And if I were richer, I probably would have been able to learn more about art and science as well. But girls aren't expected to go to school, so your brother might be able to go, but you'd probably stay home. When I was a kid, your age, I had to watch my brother and sisters and help out around the house. Some women, of course, can challenge these social expectations, and some of them are able to become artists or scientists, although most of the time their husbands take the spotlight on those issues. And it helps to have a father who is in one of those roles who could teach you while you were young. Another thing that women could do in this time period, especially if they were wealthy, to stay educated was to run salons. So these wealthier women would host parties of other women where they would talk about books that they'd read. It's kind of like a fancy book club, and it was not somewhere you got your nails done. But often it was less about science and more about philosophy.
It's wonderful to meet you. I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Bridget Bennett. I was raised on a farm in Michigan and always wanted to help people. So when my country started to be torn apart by war, I decided to train as a nurse and join my local brothers in arms and fight for my country on the side of the Union. I joined the 3rd Michigan in 1861, and I have fought in several battles. It's been very hard to watch my country be torn apart by this question of slavery. So my role in my unit, the 3rd Michigan, is somewhat unusual for most women. Most women that I know, and what I would have done if my country hadn't been torn apart by war, are wives and mothers, and they're educated to be wives and mothers. But because of this terrible war and seeing a need, I decided to do something different. So I am what is called a vivandier, or a daughter of the regiment. And women who are vivandiers during the American Civil War are women who are kind of like field medics. So they're French influence directly from the Crimean War. And they, during the Civil War, they didn't actually have nurses or doctors who were on the field during the battle. They, the injured and wounded, they would have to just wait on the battlefield, which may be days, until the battle was actually over before they would be retrieved by the doctors or nurses and have medical attention. So in the French Crimean War, which is the biggest global conflict to happen before the American Civil War, women who were devoted to their brothers or husbands or fathers joined to act as that on the battlefield medical staff.
So the clothing that we would have worn, and I have a little bit of a tutorial here too, that there's going to be more posted later. The clothing would have been linen as an underdress for the women, with wool as an outer dress. The outer dress was normally called an apron dress. I am going to show a little bit of that video that I created a tutorial for this. However, I did use linen as wool is more difficult. So when they created their clothing, they would actually go from start to finish. So they would shear the sheep. They would spindle the wool. Spindle is a little, it almost looks like a top with a long piece of wood and then a little circle thing, and they would spindle the wool into thread. They would wind it onto a thread wheel and then prior to that naturally dye it as well. They would then use this and place it on their loom, which I have an example of here. And with that, you would see the rocks hanging off the bottom of it to weight it. It's similar to some of the loom work that people will do now, but it's still a little different. Just because of like most of our looms nowadays are not up and down, but actually lengthwise or vertical. For their trims, and which you can see on like some of the under or the apron dresses for sure, they would have trims sometimes. That trim would be made from tablet weaving. They would also make belts from tablet weaving, and this is where I kind of have an example here. You would take one like little pieces of boards even you could use, and you would do it separately. And that would create your belts and your trims and decorative. They also would use brooches which have been found in several areas, which is how we believe that women actually went on voyages with them. We've also found some of the spindles in places that the Vikings would have voyaged. They would use brooches for close to, on the apron dresses, close to the edges. Those brooches are believed to have also been used to like hang the clothing from sometimes, etc. Because it was such a task to make it that they often took really good care of it. The other thing they did with these was use them as decorative, and it's believed that depending on your class in society, depending on how decorative that might be, and then there would be beads hanging from it.
So understandably, clothing for wealthier girls and women was more expensive. And since we're doing this at home, where you probably don't have a lot of supplies or access to a fabric store, we're going to show you how to put together an outfit for a peasant girl, kind of like me, but younger, from the Renaissance. So girls were actually expected after about the age of 7 to wear exactly the same things that women would wear, or for your boys, it would be the exact same thing as men would wear. They basically treated any kid above the age of 7 as a young adult. And so they asked them to do the same duties. They had the same kind of work. Sometimes kids were sent away as early as like 8 or 9 to start learning a trade. So a young girl who is a peasant might start going to live with other families to learn to be a servant in a more wealthy family's home. So lots of different things that could possibly have happened. So we're going to go ahead and talk about how to make a young person outfit out of supplies you might have at home. This is my costume. So I'm wearing some boots. I've got a skirt on, and I've got an overskirt on because this one might get dirty. So I can kind of let it down, or I can lift it up if I'm walking through some deep mud puddles or something. I've got on my jimmies, which we'll talk about, and I've got on a coif, and I've got a bodice, and that's it. So let's talk more about what that costume looks like. So going back to a woman's or a young girl's costume in the Renaissance, I just wanted to show you again how I put mine together. So this is my chemise. I actually bought this online once when I went to a Renaissance fair and I wanted to look super authentic. But what you're going to do is you're going to take a big t-shirt, and we're going to just kind of show you how to make kind of this puffiness in the sleeve and kind of like this little, you know, ruched collar thing. And then you have your bodice, which I just used a vest I bought from the thrift store. And what I did is they always threaded up their bodice, but I just kind of already had buttons on mine, so I just wrapped it around. If you guys are going to make your own, you can just kind of thread your yarn through, but I just used yarn for this today. And then down here are just your skirts, and you can have one or two, and that's pretty much how it goes. So for this coif, again, I just want to show you, this is dish towel, and this is hair tie. And what I did is I just kind of, and then bam, bam, beautiful little coif bonnet thing. It's not super authentic, but I think it looks okay. And again, just remember that for your costume, it doesn't have to be authentic. You're just trying to get into character and get a little bit of the idea of what it was like to be in that era of time. Okay, so when you're using you're gonna make a bodice from a t-shirt like this one or a long sleeve shirt, what you're gonna do is you're gonna wanna cut off this area here and do the same thing on the other side, like so. And then you're gonna kind of come down here in the front and make a nice scoop neck, like so. You can leave it a little bit wider over here. And then in the front, you're gonna go ahead and just kind of do a little like this. The back you can actually just kind of cut slightly like so that it's nice and tall, gives you some structure. It's nice to use a slightly smaller shirt so that it doesn't actually button, because then you can use the buttonholes here and the buttons here to kind of do your lacing, so it'll look kind of like this a little bit in the front, and it'll look like a bodice. You can actually come down a little bit lower if you want to, like so. It's totally up to you. And then if you have a sewing machine, you'll probably want to hem these a little bit, but if you don't, it'll just look ratty and old, like you're really poor. So not a big deal. And that's how a nice simple way of making a bodice that you could use for a Renaissance festival. Here's another thing you can add to your Renaissance outfit. So taking a plain, large white t-shirt, so kind of so that it's still a little bit, has that chemise feel, you can turn it into a cute little peasant top. So I found this on this wardrobe refashion, but they didn't actually give instructions. So what you're going to be able to do here is you are going to cut open this collar a little bit. And then what you're going to do is you're going to fold. So I'm going to do a dashed line. There we go. You're going to fold here, and then you are going to need to sew that down, because what you're going to do is you're going to leave some room here to thread a ribbon through here. And the ribbon is going to help you be able to kind of create that ruched look. So you want to, when you fold it and sew it, you want to be able to leave enough space to thread that ribbon through. And usually I kind of attach like a paper clip or a safety pin to my ribbon to help me pull it through, because otherwise it's kind of hard to grab. And then all you have to do is kind of do like some little cute little like on the cuff. And then she had her ribbons come out here so that she could do a little tie. So then you can see how she's strung this through here, and I can even make this a bit bigger. Well, I can't really, but if you look at this, she has a ribbon through here and it's tied in the front, so it kind of gives you a little bit of that collar look like I had. And then this, she didn't hem, it was just kind of left to be kind of cute. If you wanted to have kind of poofier sleeves, as long as your t-shirt's long enough, you could cut it and do the same technique and thread in a ribbon so that you can kind of tighten it, and then it'll poof that sleeve up a little bit. So that's one way to make the chemise or the peasant's blouse for your Renaissance costume.
So my uniform, I said it's very similar to being a French influence. And it would be something that was very similar to what ladies would wear during exercise. So if you were in gym class in the 1860s, this would be a very similar uniform. So let me see if I can get a good video. So I have a jacket, this hat called a kepi. I have a belt and a sash, so those are part of my actual uniform. But the part where it's similar to exercise clothing is that I am wearing a skirt as well as trousers. And then I have my red side lacing boots. So ladies, when they were exercising, they would wear different clothing than what they would typically wear. So most women on a day-to-day basis during the 1860s, they would wear a full-length dress, and something that was really important was how women wore their hair. They would wear their hair, ladies wear their hair parted down the middle. If you were a man, you would wear your hair parted down the side, but it was a big no-no for ladies to wear their hair side parted of all the strange etiquette. Etiquette's very, very, very important to my everyday life in the 1860s. Even when I am fighting a war, it's still very much expected to have very, very good manners and good etiquette. So one of those things is that after the age of 16, a lady will start wearing her hair up in a bun. Up until then, up until I was 16, I wore my hair in long braids, or one long braid. I wore that down. Sometimes for special occasions, I would curl my hair, and I still curl my hair for very special occasions like balls and dances. My dresses, when I'm not wearing my uniform, are very modest. They have long sleeves. They come up to the top of my neck. And one of the most important parts of a lady's clothing during this time period is lots and lots of undergarments. So under my uniform, under my dresses, I have long pantaloons on. I have an undershirt called a chemise, and then I also wear a corset. And those were really important elements of a lady's wardrobe. Now, when I'm not wearing my uniform, when I am wearing my full dress, I would wear a crinoline, or known as a hoop skirt, which makes my skirt big and wide. It's not very practical for working out on the battlefield, but they are really fun to wear when you're dancing, and they're all the height of fashion. So it's an understructure that keeps my skirt very wide and very full. So over that, I would wear petticoats to make sure that you can't see any of the hoops under my skirt, and then I would wear my dress. Now, if I have a special occasion, if I'm going to a dance or a ball, one of the things that I would wear, my dress is going to look a little bit different. It's going to probably be a lighter color, probably be a little more decorated, and one of the things that's going to set it apart is it's going to have a lower across the shoulder neckline, and it's also going to have short sleeves. So a little bit different than my day-to-day outfit. Now, hats are very, very important during the 1860s, during the American Civil War. And this hat, my kepi, it's a great hat for when I am outside, when I'm on the battlefield, when I am helping people. It keeps the sun out of my eyes. It's a little bit like a modern day baseball hat. And this little red diamond on top shows what battalion I'm in. I have another uniform jacket that shows what rank I am. I have the rank of a first sergeant in my unit in the 3rd Michigan. We're an infantry unit. And it shows a lot of different things. Now, when I'm on the battlefield, medicine is very different than what it's like today. So the other piece of my uniform, which I don't have with me today, is I have a tiny little keg. And that keg, I carry it in a leather strap on my shoulder, kind of like a purse. And that keg, usually on the battlefield, is filled with brandy, which is kind of a type of wine. And it was believed during the 1860s that that had medicinal purposes. So that's another influence that vivandiers, or daughters of the regiment, get from the French. So, as I was saying, hats are very important. This is not a hat that is particularly fashionable for most ladies. And hats are really important because anytime you go outside, you're not properly dressed unless you are wearing some sort of thing on your head, typically. You're not going to go to the store, you're not going to go out visiting friends unless you have a hat on. And they're a little bit different if you're going to an evening occasion, like a dance or a ball or a fancy dinner. You're going to wear something a little bit different. But when I'm not wearing my uniform, when I'm in one of my dresses, I wouldn't have an outfit complete without a hat. And the hat that was the height of fashion during the 1860s was what's called a spoon bonnet. This is my spoon bonnet. My ribbons are a little wrinkly. I haven't worn it in a while. But it's got a very interesting profile, which is what makes it look like a spoon. And it's very decorated to match the ribbon and the dresses. And then it's decorated all around inside to frame my face. I'll put it on quickly, even though it looks kind of silly with my uniform. So these would be tied under my chin. There we go, there's the full look. Or if they were pressed, they would just be left to hang down because this ribbon during the 1860s was very expensive and you wanted to show it off as much as you could. So most bonnets, mine doesn't have this, would have another little teeny tiny ribbon underneath that you would tie just so you could leave these undone and your hat wouldn't fall off. The other thing that a lady might wear is a decorated net. I keep mine in with my bonnet. This is what I wear if I'm going to a dance or if I'm going to something fancy, in addition to different flowers in my hair and things. So this one's a lot lighter and a lot easier to wear, especially if you're doing a lot of dancing. You don't have to worry if it's going to fall off your head. And the other thing that I wear when I am out in the field is an overcoat. This is my overcoat. So it's made of wool. At any given time, I am wearing up to 9 layers of wool with my uniform and with my coat on. It has big, wide pagoda sleeves because I still want to look a little bit fashionable and sort of show the ideals and the fashion femininity ideals of the mid-1860s. So there's my overcoat. And yeah, I think that's a good overview of kind of what my life looks like right now. I'm really hopeful that the war will be over, that I can go back to normal life. And it's been very hard to see some of the people that I love the most facing so much danger on a day-to-day basis, but I can't imagine what life would be like for them without having me there and able to help them.
Children followed in their parents' footsteps, wealth played a huge role into how different children would be raised. So like if a parent was a blacksmith, then their children would probably be blacksmiths. At least for the men. The women again took care of the house. And then with wealth, it depended on education they would get, different things they would do, etc. Mortality rates also were dependent on wealth because you had a higher mortality rate for lower class than you did for higher class. However, all classes generally still had a high mortality in birth and early childhood. The other era, because I know Jesse went over some of the Civil War era, some of that part with their children rearing was a little different, even though the Viking era and the Renaissance era was very similar. For Civil War era, because of the Civil War, a lot of the children would have to step up to take over their parents' roles. The boys also a lot of times played like war games and were excited about war and would even at times go and fight depending on their ages. So there was a lot of that occurred too.
For chores, for me, what I have to do is I have to cook and clean and bake, and I do a lot of our sewing for our house. And so I'm going to show you I'm not the best at cleaning. I don't like it. So what I like to do instead are some of the sewing activities. So I'm going to teach you guys how to do some embroidery. All right, so for our embroidery project, you can probably find some of these supplies at home. So what you need, you're going to need a needle. I've got these embroidery needles here. I don't know if you can see them, but they tend to be a bit wider than a normal sewing needle. And you want something that has a really big eye to it. This one's probably way too big, but something where you can get a big, thick piece of through. And then I've got some embroidery floss or embroidery thread that I stole from one of my cross-stitching projects. And I took this pillowcase and I put it in an embroidery frame. Now I'm guessing some of you guys probably don't have one of these, so I took a smaller piece of fabric. I cut out a piece of cardboard into something like a picture frame, and then I attached the fabric to it with binder clips. This will totally work. We just want to have a little bit of tension in your fabrics so that when you pull your needle tight, it doesn't cause your fabric to fold for you. So on your plain fabric, what you can do is you can draw a picture of what you want to sew. So I'm just going to use a pencil. Now know that the pencil probably won't come out, so we'll just have to cover it up with fabric. So I'm going to draw a little, really hard to see flower. Maybe a pencil is not the best. Well, I can see it. So we're going to talk about two different types of embroidery stitches today. And the first one is going to be back stitch. I'm going to grab a needle in the mouth. I'm going to do some pink petals for our flower. And most embroidery thread comes with six strands. So you want to just make sure you don't pull any of those out. And then you're going to thread your needle. If you have a needle threader, this activity will go faster. Okay, once you have your needle threaded, you want to make sure there's a knot at the other end of your thread, like so. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and do the outside of one of my petals. So I want to make sure you see this. So what you're going to do, we're going to do a back stitch. So that means we're going to come up through from the back to the front, and we're going to go back down. And that looks like just a small basic stitch. Okay, but then for the next one, we're going to go up far away, and we're going to come back down where the first one ended. Now my fabric is kind of stretchy because it's not really the best fabric for this, but again, I found a pillowcase. So you can see how we're kind of making an outline of this petal here. So that's a back stitch because you're basically working backwards to sew it like that. And you can make them as long or as short as you want. It's best to be consistent. But I never said I was good at embroidery. I just said I knew how. All right, once you have your outline, the other kind of stitch is kind of a fill-it-in stitch. So if we wanted to fill in our flower petal, we would do a satin stitch. So basically a satin stitch is you start at one side and you poke up, then you go down where you want it to end, and then we're going to come up right next to that one. So almost at the very same spot that that one came down. See this? I think so. And then we're just going to go backwards, like so. Boom. And if it doesn't fill it in properly, you can always go back again one more time. Again, my fabric is not really the best for this. You usually want a slightly thicker fabric like linen and not this Walmart cotton. That's probably not the best. But again, to just fill it in, you just kind of keep going back and forth right next to each other. Until you've kind of got that spot filled in. And those are the two most basic stitches for embroidery. And it's kind of a calming activity you can do at night in the winter when all your chores are done. And it helps make some of your outfits look a little bit more expensive and a little bit classier. You can also do this to your handkerchiefs and, you know, put your initials on them and that sort of thing. Especially for young women who are about to get married, they would often embroider themselves some fancy handkerchiefs so that they had their new initials ready to go for when they got married. And that's some basic, not super great embroidery. Okay, so one thing that you can do if you have a pure cotton fabric, which you might have since you might be making masks around the house, is this isn't going to pull as much as my pillowcase fabric, but I found a fabric that already had a printed pattern on it. So one thing you can do, which is kind of cool, is you can just make your pattern stand out a little bit by doing a satin stitch and a back stitch on this. So again, just with the satin stitch, I'm just kind of going in, pulling down, making sure that I come right next to that last stitch, and then going backwards. And this will kind of give my flower a little bit more of a textured feel and kind of make it look a little bit cooler. And I also wanted to show you what it looks like if you don't have embroidery floss. You can use real thread. So I'm going to show you that with the blue of the center of the flower. So let me finish this petal and I'll get right with you. Okay, so with your regular thread, what you can do is you can kind of make a really basic thread by doubling it and cutting it with scissors, which I don't have. Remember, I'm a poor peasant woman. And then what you probably should do is double it up again because normal thread is pretty thin. And this will give you something to work with. Now, this is not all coiled together like a normal piece of string is. So this one has been kind of twisted up. So what you need to do here is you want to go ahead and tie a knot in one end. And then you're not going to really be able to twist it yourself. So you just want to make sure that your stitches are small so that your thread doesn't separate like this. when you're sewing. But you can do it at home with just basic sewing thread, and I wanted to make sure you guys knew you could do that. On the other end, you can take a pair of scissors and kind of make the end a little bit neater so that you can thread it more easily, or you can kind of just thread it a little bit at a time. And that's how you embroider. You can do this for hours on end because there's really not much else to do as a woman at home when your husband is out working. You can go visit your friends, or you can do embroidery while you visit your friends. A lot of the times women were expected to have something in their hands that they were working on. So this was one of those things. And it kind of gives your fabric a little bit cooler look when you're done with it.
Hi, it's Bridget again. So I just wanted to share a little bit more with you about what my daily life would have been like in the 1860s. So something that was really important to what women did during the mid 1800s was cooking. Most women, unless you're very wealthy, probably were the main cook for their household, including myself. So even while I am out at war, I still cook. It's not nearly as fun as it is when I'm at home, where I get to make my favorite dish, which is macaroni and cheese. It's very new, very fashionable, and I don't get it very often, but it is very delicious. You might have heard of it. It's becoming quite popular. But what I do frequently make is something called hardtack, and this is a staple of the soldier's diet. It's a staple of my diet when I am out fighting the war, and it's also something that we get issued with our daily rations by the military. So something that you can make at home, but also something that I'm issued. And it's kind of like a cross between a really hard cracker and a really hard piece of bread. And it's pretty darn easy to make. So I'm going to show you how to do that. So just take some flour, salt, water, and if you want to jazz it up and get a little fancy, you can add in a little bit of bacon grease, or you can add in a little bit of lard, kind of whatever you have on hand. So I have some bacon grease here. I might add in, we'll see. We'll see if I'm feeling fancy, or if I just want to go traditional. So you'll take 2 cups of flour. I already have 1 cup in my bowl, and then I'm going to measure out a second one. Now, it's a little hard to do because I am using a jar. Okay, 2 cups. So because I'm using this small mason jar, I couldn't get my 1 cup or half cup measuring cup into the mouth of the jar, so I had to use my handy dandy quarter cup, which is where a little bit of math and hopefully not getting sidetracked really comes in handy, so you can make sure you're doing good measurements. All right, so the next thing that I'm going to add in is a half. I always measure my salt over the sink because sometimes it comes out really fast and can go everywhere, and then it's really messy, and I don't want to get it into my food because I'll get too much in there, and that's kind of icky. So the next thing I am going to add in is the water into my dough, and I think I've gotten myself way too much water. So I'm just going to pour a little out. All right, so it's going to go straight into the flour. Then I'm going to grab a big spoon. So hardtack is really famous for being kind of icky, kind of gross. That's why it's fun to jazz it up sometimes and put a little bit of something maybe a tiny bit yummier than just salt and water in. That's why I like a little bit of bacon grease in mine, but you can use different things depending on kind of what you have around, but traditionally it's just flour, salt, and water. All right, so you want to stir it up so it becomes kind of a dough. Pretty thick. That's pretty normal. Now, you want to get it up into a pretty bread-like dough. So you can kind of knead it around with your hands. That's the really fun part of making hardtack. And should not be quite as sticky as mine is. Mine's a little stickier. I think I added too much water. So we can add in a little bit of flour to make it a little less sticky here in a second. Pretty good consistency for our hardtack dough. So there, you can see it. And it's not really going to rise or do anything very exciting because there's nothing to make it rise in there. So the next thing we're going to do, we're going to take our lightly floured surface here and a rolling pin, and you're just going to roll it out. So you're going to roll it out to about 1/3 of an inch thick. Might need a little more flour in case it starts to stick to your rolling pin. So we have our hardtack, and I'm just going to move the camera so you can see. There we go. It's all rolled out. Now you want to go ahead and cut it in squares. Try to do this as evenly as possible. And I just have my oven set to 350 degrees. If you need help from a parent, and if you want to make this at home, talk to them first before you start the project. So one of the interesting things about hardtack that it's kind of characteristic is it has holes poked in it. So one of the ways that you can do this is just by taking a fork, just a standard fork, and I'm going to wash my hands really quick. Now we're just going to take a fork and we're going to poke little holes in the hardtack. We're ready to go. So I have a cookie sheet that I have ready. I like to put foil on my cookie sheets when I bake, so that's what I've gone and done. And then you're just going to lay it out, leaving a little bit of space for your hardtack if it spreads when it's baking, kind of like you would with cookies. So there we go. We have our hardtack laid out. And now we're just going to put it in the oven. I'm going to put the timer on for, let's see, here we go. I'm going to put the timer on for 10 minutes, and then we're going to see where it ends up. It might need a little more time, but it should come out looking very nice and golden brown. Again, I have dough on my hands now, so I'm trying to wash. And then we'll taste it with a little bit of bacon and see how it turned out. Hardtack's pretty incredible, and why it was so popular for the military to use is it lasts forever. It doesn't spoil. So they say that hardtack can last for like 100 years. Probably wouldn't want to eat it, but it'll still be around. It doesn't disintegrate. So it's a great food for soldiers to have. Food scarcity has been really hard during the Civil War. So you're really lucky if you get things like an apple or a pear. You're lucky if you get bacon. You're very lucky if you get all sorts of food of any kind, really. Something that we eat frequently with our hardtack is a food called salt pork. And that is really, really salty. Sometimes it's also called salt horse, but it's actually made from pork, not horse. So that was cured in a barrel, kind of like ham would be cured or bacon, but way, 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 way saltier. So salty, we have to soak it for a while before we eat it. So we'll eat that with our hardtack. Not a lot of fresh vegetables, unless we can get them. Kind of depends on where we're at and where we're fighting it. One of the things that I'm really lucky that I usually have is coffee. I love coffee. I'm a big coffee person. And coffee is a little bit interesting to boil. Sometimes we don't always have the proper items around. And some of the soldiers in my unit really like to boil their coffee in a sock, in a pot of water. They call it sock coffee, and I think that's really, really gross. You shouldn't drink coffee that's been made in a sock, because I've seen their socks, and I know that that is just a bad idea for your overall health. All right, well, I'll sign off until the hardtack is ready. So here's hoping it turns out good. See you soon. Hi, welcome back. I just took my hardtack out of the oven. I need another oven mitt to actually show you. It's still pretty hot. There it is. So traditionally the hardtack would have been baked quite a bit longer and a lot slower temperature, or excuse me, a lot longer and at a lot lower temperature, not slower. That doesn't make any sense. Because you want to draw as much moisture out of that dough as possible. That prolongs the life. So it's not going to get moldy, it's not going to spoil soon. But because we're probably going to be eating it in a pretty soon time frame, I've done mine at 350 for roughly 20 minutes, and you can see the result here. There we go. So I'm going to let this cool for just another second here, and then we will try some with some bacon. Hi, Bridget again. We have our hardtack right here and our bacon, and we're going to give it a taste here, see how this batch turned out. This is a lot fluffier and doughier than my hardtack when I'm in the field. I like to break mine up. Sometimes the men in my unit like to fry theirs, but I like to eat it a little like a cracker with a bit of bacon on it. Turned out pretty good. You can try for yourself at home. See what you think of hardtack.
The games that the Vikings played were really fun. They did wrestling, tug of war, a lot of the games we already know. They also ice skated. I have an example here of the ice skates they would use, which were not just for games, but also for traveling from place to place. The kids also had like wooden toys they could play with, and tops and swords and bows and everything that they were able to do. There was also the leather game, which was where you had a scrap of leather and the center that you had to hold on to. And each of you held onto it, and then you were trying to get something behind you. And so whoever pulled the leather the furthest to get the ball behind them would win that leather game. It's kind of like tug of war, but with like 4 sides.
In this picture, there are supposedly about 80 different games represented from the Renaissance era. So it's kind of hard to see, but you've got kids playing with masks and putting on a show up here, kids just doing gymnastics over here. You've got these wheels that they would make and they would practice rolling them around. You've got some leapfrog somewhere and all kinds of different, like, I think they're doing bowling back here. So this is kind of just a general representation of different games that they played, but I'm going to show you one particular game. So when I was a little girl in the Renaissance, one of the games I liked to play was called quoits. So what you need are a couple of sticks, and what we're going to do is we're going to turn these sticks into rings. So they're not going to be perfectly round, well, that's okay. But what we're going to do is we're going to try to get it to be somewhat round, and they're going to be very small little rings. We're going to play this one really close by because I didn't want to kill any of my lilac trees. So kind of like that, and then what we're going to do is we're going to take some string and we're going to lash this together. So I'm going to cut some of this. Doesn't need to be too long. Again with it, and I'm sure Gary could teach you guys a better way to do this, but I'm just going to kind of just start spinning it around. I have enough string for my little knots, and then I'm going to use the other end to come lash over that eventually. So from this side, I can kind of do the same thing, and then I'm just going to tuck my end under there so that I am starting to cover it up a little bit so that I don't need to do anything else. Now, spring is a good time to find these bendier sticks, but you are probably going to have to take them off of a tree or off of a weed or something that's growing, because if your stick is dead, it's going to break instead of bend. So you do kind of need a live stick for this activity. And you'll notice that now I can let it go, and it is kind of like that a little bit. One thing we can do is we can keep going all the way around if we wanted to, and that would kind of help our stick hold its shape a bit better, but we don't need to. And then you definitely want to double this knot this time because you don't have anything to lash it on with. So we'll just double that knot, and we'll leave it a little bit tail. Okay, now we've got our ring for quoits. So what quoits is basically you're going to take a stick, you're going to stand it up in the ground, and then this is kind of like a ring toss. You're going to toss your little ring and see if you can get it to land on your stick. Another fun game you can do with this ring is you can take another stick, like this one, and you can tie your ring to the stick, and then you can make a stick game like that. So let's get another piece of string here. We'll tie this one on to our ring. Tie this one onto our ring. And then we'll tie it onto our stick. And I like to tie it at least kind of near where there might have been another thing sticking out of the stick so that it has something to hold on to. It doesn't fall off quite as easily. So like here maybe. And I'm going to do a little bit of lashing on this to make sure that knot stays pretty well. So I'm going to double knot it, and then I'm going to lash it a bit and just cover up that knot a little bit, and then tie another double knot so that we know it stays. So now I have a ring stick game, and so the idea is you kind of toss that up and you try to land your ring on your stick. Nope. I got it!
All right, well, I think I'm going to go and play some chess or some checkers, or maybe play some cards, depending on who I can get to play with me. But until then, It was wonderful talking with you and sharing with you a little bit about my life and what I do during the American Civil War. Thank you so much, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.